Hello, everyone. This is Live Life Well TV host Robert Landau, and this is part 2 of a two-part series we are doing on Live Life Well TV on the great Charlie Chaplin. If you missed part 1, go back onto the channel and do see it if you wish before you see this episode, which is part 2. Part 1 dealt with Charlie Chaplin's early years, and this part will deal with his later years. This is all part of a weekly lecture series on Live Life Well TV that we call America's Greatest Personalities. Even though Charlie Chaplin never became an American citizen, he certainly spent most of his professional career here, and he then, I would say, is one of America's greatest personalities. So let's begin with some things that Charlie Chaplin was famous for saying. Charlie Chaplin once said, "All I need to make a comedy is a park, a policeman, and a pretty girl." Chaplin also once said of his little tramp character, "I had no idea of the character, but the moment I was dressed, the clothes and the makeup made me feel the person that he was. I began to know him, and by the time I walked out on that stage, he was fully born." Chaplin also once said, "I remain just one thing and one thing only, and that is a clown. It places me on a far higher plane than any politician." Chaplin also once said, "I went into the business for the money, and the art actually grew out of it. If people happen to be disillusioned by that remark, I really can't help it. It's the truth." And finally, Charlie Chaplin once said, "In the end, everything is a gag." And here are some facts you might not have known about Chaplin. Did you know that most people believe that Charlie Chaplin, because they always saw him in black and white on the screen, had brown eyes, or certainly dark eyes? People, he would often say, were absolutely astounded when they would meet him in person because he had the most amazing, deep blue, penetrating eyes in person. Did you know that although Adolf Hitler was not a fan and was actually misinformed of the fact that Charlie was Jewish, which he wasn't, and therefore Hitler despised him for what he thought he was, Hitler was also very well aware of how beloved Chaplin was throughout the world at the time. And that seems to be the reason why Hitler grew the Chaplin-esque mustache that Hitler would always sport, because Hitler thought it would endear him to the people. Did you know that as a child, Chaplin was confined to a bed for weeks due to a very serious illness? And it was at that time that his mother, just to sort of try to lift his spirits, would stay in his room with him all the time and throw open the window and describe what she was seeing on the street so Charlie could kind of feel better. And the way she would do that was actually very funny, and that was one of the main reasons why Charlie decided to become a comedian. Did you know that after all the years Charlie spent working in the States, as I alluded to before, he never became a US citizen? By 1917, Chaplin was one of the best-known personalities, if not only in the States, but in the world. But it was also in 1917 that he started to encounter a little turbulence concerning his star status. Stardom to him meant not only acting, but also writing, not only composing, not only directing, but also producing all of his pictures as well, as we mentioned in part one. In a short period of time, he went from being a contract player in comedy film shorts to forming his own full-length feature film production company. It was an incredible journey for him. He was indeed the total package when it came to anything and everything having to do with film production in Hollywood. But by now, unfortunately, as I kind of concluded in part one, things slowly began to unravel for Chaplin, both professionally and personally. Personally, because in 1917, at a party given by the one and only Samuel Goldwyn, Chaplin happened to have met a 16-year-old starlet by the name of Mildred Harris. The wedding took place the following year, and it was very clear that from the start, the marriage happened to have been just a bit of a mismatch. So much so that after only 3 months, Chaplin would move out of the house that he built for he and his wife and mother-in-law. He would separate from Mildred and her mother in 1920. It was also at that time that, largely due to the turmoil in his personal life, Chaplin released only 2 film shorts. Both, unfortunately, were failures. Chaplin would say that movie making at that troubled point in his life was just like pulling teeth. His words, not mine. He had his own production company and had also teamed up with a studio called First National to distribute his films. The weight and pressure of that only increased his anxiety level. You know, it's kind of a case of as within, so without. It was now time for Chaplin to deliver not only what he had promised First National Studios, but what he had also promised to himself. His first major feature film. Despite all of the downfalls Chaplin was feeling at this time, he somehow rose to the occasion and ended up producing nothing short of a masterpiece. It's amazing what artists can do. Sometimes we draw from personal pain, loss, and hardship, and take all of that and rise to new and better heights. And that's what he did concerning his feature film venture. The year was 1921, and that film was called The Kid. The film featured Chaplin's now legendary tramp character, but now there also happened to have been a sidekick. Talented child actor, you might have heard his name, Jackie Coogan, teamed up with Chaplin, and what an amazing team they were. Audiences were absolutely delighted about what they saw. The interplay between those two was amazing. It was the perfect combination of slapstick and sympathy, and that combination simply wowed the crowds that would flock to see The Kid. Chaplin was now on a roll, and with his contract ending at First National Studios, he finally felt free. He had an idea now to star in a film with 2 of Hollywood's greatest stars, Mary Pickford and the one and only Douglas Fairbanks. Chaplin even built a house in their neighborhood in Hollywood so he could be close to them. Chaplin's next major film would have to do with the gold rush. His leading lady for that film would be an actress he was seeing by the name of Lila Gray. Lila would play a dance hall girl to Chaplin's tramp. Lila would never make it to the screen and had to be replaced after the first 3 months of making the movie. Why do you think he had to replace her after the film started shooting? She was pregnant with Charlie Chaplin Jr. Ms. Gray married Chaplin in November of 1924 during a break in the filming of The Gold Rush. The movie would go on to be his most successful yet, grossing no less than $4 million within the first 4 years of release. And back in those days, that was nothing short of colossal. His marriage to Gray, after she became pregnant, was not as successful, I'm sorry to say, as the film was. She was, you ready? 16. He was 35. And they would go on to have 2 sons. Gray's attorney would file for divorce. On January 10th, 1927, Chaplin would be forced to pay an absolutely unheard of amount of $825,000 as a settlement. All kinds of things leaked to the press at this point concerning Chaplin. Things such as his miserliness, his neglect of his wife and 2 children, and the issue of sexual degeneracy. The public's reaction to all of this, of course, was swift and fierce. National women's groups led a movement to boycott any and all of Chaplin's films. If that wasn't bad enough, a former Chaplin studio employee wanted to write an article on him by the name of Charlie Chaplin, His Real Life Story. And real in the title of that article was in capitals. Oof. Chaplin tried unsuccessfully to have the article stopped. In February of 1927, millions of people would read how Chaplin was moody, demanding, egotistical, and a massive perfectionist that would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. And if that wasn't bad enough, federal authorities accused Charlie of tax avoidance. They insisted that he pay $1.3 million all the way back to 1918. This resulted in legal issues that would go on for over a year, but the money, in the form of a lien against the studio, did have to be paid. Chaplin was also accused of being a communist, at least according to a certain Senator McCarthy. J. Edgar Hoover would also enter the picture concerning Chaplin. It turns out that the FBI had been keeping files on Chaplin for quite some time, all 1,900 pages of them, as they kind of felt he might be sympathetic with leftist beliefs. He was also accused of being Jewish because his half-brother Sidney happened to have been 3/4 Jewish. When Chaplin was questioned about being a communist, he responded with the following words, quote, "I do not want to create any revolution. All I really want to do is create a few more films so that I might amuse people. I hope so, at least," unquote. In 1927, Chaplin suffered a nervous breakdown. I mean, that's kind of understandable, given the immense stresses that he was going through at the time. And production at his latest film, The Circus, was immediately shut down because of the circus that Chaplin was having to address in his professional and private lives. Did any of this controversy clear up? Well, no, but more about that shortly. When his film, The Circus, actually was completed and released, thankfully, it was a major hit. The Motion Picture Academy of Arts and Sciences voted to give Chaplin a Lifetime Achievement Award that year, one of the first awards of its kind. Chaplin was starting to feel a little better about life, but all was not as it should be. Why? A little something called talking pictures. Chaplin resisted them with everything he had in a major way. His whole claim to fame, think about it, rested on the tried and true silent genre of filmmaking. His tramp character, all of Hollywood's producers embraced the approach of, but they also embraced the approach of talking pictures. In fact, by 1930, he was the only producer in Hollywood still producing silent films. It's not so much that Chaplin was intensely against the talkies, but rather he felt that silent films happened to have been a real art, and he didn't want to see this art suddenly vanish forever. To this end, he said, and I quote, "Talkies are spoiling the oldest art in the world, the art of pantomime. They are ruining the great beauty of silence. They are deafening the meaning of the screen," unquote. So Chaplin continued to make silent films. And as you can probably well imagine, he was all alone in doing this. It wasn't only producers that jumped on the boat of talkies. It was actors as well. Even Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks would retire rather than move on to the talkies. Two of Chaplin's greatest film successes would follow, and yes, they were silent films. City Lights was one of them and was released in 1931. Chaplin was such a perfectionist that out of the 534 paid working days it took to complete the film, only 166 of them involved actual shooting. 166 days out of 530 days paid working on the film. Think about that. This was due to on-the-spot experimentation on Chaplin's part and tons, and I mean tons, of retakes that went along with his process of experimentation. The film was a major hit as far as movie viewers goes, and endless lines would always form before each showing of that picture. Time magazine would write that Chaplin, quote, "will be doing business after talkies have been traded in for television," unquote. His second film was one you also probably have heard of, called Modern Times. It was released in 1936. The picture would star his future and third wife, Paulette Goddard. They were married in 1936. Their marriage would last only 3 years and would end in divorce in 1942. Marriage, never seemed to work out for Charlie, at least up to this point in time. Turning back to Chaplin's career, he realized that he could take advantage of talking pictures in a new, innovative, and unique way. He now could add a music track to his silent films. Music that he would compose. This wasn't only the case for his new silent films, but of course he would go back and score that music to his previously released silent films as well. He would add a music track to all of those films and re-release them to the public with great success. But Chaplin would often look around him and hate what the film industry was turning into. It depressed him to the point that he virtually hid himself on the French Riviera. But it was there that he had a brilliant idea. In 1937, an associate of Chaplin's remarked that there was a similarity in appearance between Chaplin's tramp character and that of Adolf Hitler. And Chaplin's next film would soon become a reality. The idea was to create a story of mistaken identity and make an anti-Nazi satire on political aggression. The film was called The Greatest Dictator and was Chaplin's greatest hit ever. The year was 1940. The movie was released only 1 year before the US entered into World War II. In the film, he played two roles. One was that of a soft-spoken Jewish peasant. Yes, I did say soft-spoken, because for the first time, we would actually hear the voice of Charlie Chaplin as that character. The other character in the picture he would play would be silent because it was, of course, his acclaimed tramp character. The success of the film would put Chaplin in Hollywood's unofficial list of all-time box office hits. The studio Chaplin affiliated with at the time helped him form United Artists and was overjoyed with his newfound success. But Chaplin felt bad about the subject matter of the film when he learned of the true horrors of the Nazi concentration camps. Charlie would admit that he would have never made the great dictator had he known about the true extent of the Nazi regime. During this time, Chaplin was briefly associated with an actress by the name of Jean Barry, but things came to an abrupt end when she started to harass him. She filed a paternity suit, and even though blood tests would prove that he was not the father, they were inadmissible evidence in court. Chaplin would be ordered to pay $75,000 a week until the child was 21 years of age. Then he met the daughter of a very famous American playwright by the name of Eugene O'Neill. Chaplin would marry Ona O'Neill in 1943. He was 54, she was 17. And actually the marriage was a good one, and believe it or not, lasted for quite a while. They would have 8 children together. Unfortunately, J. Edgar Hoover was very active behind the scenes during this time. He was sure that Chaplin was somehow involved in un-American activities and did his best to end Chaplin's stay in the United States of America. It was 1952, Chaplin left the country then to visit England, and he found out about this and secretly negotiated, Hoover did, with the INS to revoke Chaplin's re-entry permit into the States. As you can well imagine, Chaplin was heartbroken and sadly decided to take up residence in Switzerland. Not too bad a place if you were not allowed to re-enter the United States. But he did return to the US briefly to receive an honorary Oscar in 1972. This was one of many Oscars this brilliant man would receive in his unprecedented career. His final films were A King in New York, which was released in 1957, and A Countess from Hong Kong that starred Sophia Loren and Marlon Brando. In March of 1975, Chaplin was honored to be made a Knight of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth II. The great Charlie Chaplin would leave this world on Christmas Day of 1977 in Vevey, Switzerland. He was 88 years of age and passed on of natural causes. I wonder if this incredibly talented soul, with the terribly troubled life, knew of the enormous, everlasting impact he would have on the lives of Americans living during that time, particularly during the Depression and the World Wars, and people living not only in the States, but all over the world for all time. He made us laugh then, now, and always will. Often you and I talk of how vitally important laughter is. It's everywhere. Science now proves how important laughter is to one's health. Chaplin changed the way we would look at our troubles. That sad little tramp was our saving grace, and I can't help but feel that deep inside Charlie's heart, he was rarely repaid for many of the achievements and kindnesses that he would give of his heart to and for us. Many close to him say that during those hard times, he was lonely, heartbroken, and would question his incredible talent. A fear of failure would often plague him. He would rise so high and then feel so low. And those things he was accused of, no one had proof or any evidence of any kind. The FBI files that I mentioned before were full of nothing much. There even came this admission. It has been determined that there are no witnesses available who could offer testimony that Chaplin had been a member of the Communist Party in the past, is now a member, or has been contributed funds, who had been contributing funds to the Communist Party. That's a statement that was released at that time. All of that stuff he was accused of, that he took to heart, that wounded his spirit, could never ever be proven. No matter how heartbroken Chaplin might have felt by the end of his life, thankfully, his legacy, the little tramp, and the full body of his work, and his incredible courageous spirit and passion lives on. Charlie Chaplin is a true symbol and spirit of hope, that when times are difficult, when times are troubled, inside, because of how they might appear on the outside, you can still do amazing things. But the key is to never stop moving forward, to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Don't stop. Life is about the journey, not necessarily about the destination. And Charlie Chaplin was living proof of any and all of that. Thank you so much for hearing these two parts of our tribute to the one and only Charlie Chaplin. Be sure to check out the other episodes in the series, America's Greatest Personalities, as well as all of the other programs we have here for you on a weekly basis on this channel. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Robert Landau, Live Life Well TV host.